So you've got anti-protest protests, a peaceful vigil led by women in response to the murder of a 33-year-old woman for which a police officer has been arrested and charged, violently broken up by police. You've got the disastrous Brexit situation, the royal scandal, coronavirus.
Per million of population, the UK is one of the worst in the world.
If the government is so worried about people gathering and protesting right now, why are they trying to pass controversial laws around protesting? Why don't they wait until people can protest again before doing this? I mean, what's the rush? Since no one's allowed to protest right now, why can't we do this later? Hey, why doesn't anyone bring that up? Why doesn't the media bring that up? Why doesn't Starmer bring that up? So altogether, what's that? What have we got? A constitutional crisis, a government crisis, a police crisis, a medical crisis, an economic crisis, a social crisis, and an educational crisis. Luckily, before 2020, before the pandemic, the country was in a really strong position, so we're able to weather these storms. Oh no, actually, we've just been through 10 years of needless austerity. Here's a food bank queue in the UK from a few weeks ago. This isn't even news anymore, this is just documentary footage of 2021. So what's Johnson's answer to all this? What's the government's big plan to deal with these many crises? Well, we're going to build more nukes. I don't know about you, but definitely one of the big issues for me personally and everyone I know over the last year, 2 years, 10 years, just always talking about how worried we are about the lack of nuclear weapons that the UK has. Don't have enough money to pay nurses more than 1% pay rise. But when it comes to nuclear weapons, what's money really when we're talking about something so serious? Do you remember when food banks were newsworthy? When it first came to light that thousands of people were using food banks, do you remember? Everyone was outraged. People needing food banks in the UK? This is unbelievable. We'll have to put an end to this lickety-split. Well, that was about 10 years ago, right? Is it time for a new party? Well, it's never time for a new party. That's the thing about politics. It's never time to do anything. But the flip side to that is now's as good a time as any.
The party's over now, the dawn is drawing very nigh.
So the electoral system in Britain, as we all know, is first past the post. It can never be changed, nothing can be done about that. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you have a two-party system basically, because any third party which aligns with your political outlook is a detriment to the chances of the one of the two main parties who is most sympathetic to your view. For example, if you're worried about environmental breakdown and ecological collapse, like some nutcases are on the fringes of society, then you might want to vote for the Green Party. But if you do vote for the Green Party, that's going to take away votes from the Labour Party, which is the only mainstream party that can get into power that is sympathetic to your views. So by voting for the party that you want, the Green Party, you are actually damaging the chances of getting the government that you want. That's the system we have. That's the system we set up. Greatest democracy in the world, people. However, the way that electoral politics is discussed in Britain is propagandized towards a certain political outlook and a certain political result. Firstly, it's based on massive assumptions about the electorate, which you can't make because with two parties, we don't really know what the makeup of British politics is, as everything is skewed towards these two parties. For example, the massive political upset of Brexit, when the two major parties, the only two parties that have been in power for the last 100 years, both were against the Brexit vote, and yet the electorate was for it. What does that tell you about British politics and the representation of the people when the two major parties were on the wrong side of a referendum? And if we go into the proportion of people that actually elect the government, we can see even more the distortion between the ruling party and even the opposition, the power that these two parties wield, and the actual amount of people that vote for them. So firstly, it's worth remembering that a party who win a majority, say for example the Tories, as it usually is them, don't win 51% or more of all the available votes in the country. Nor, if they get a stonking majority, do they win something like 60%. Now, in actual fact, the winning party usually gets around 35% of votes, with 40% being an incredibly impressive result, a hefty majority. But even that 35% is misleading, because only around 70% of all the people eligible to vote actually do so. So the party that wins the election, the party of government, only ever gets about 35% of 70% of the actual population. So about 24% of people in the country vote Tory. And that makes sense, right? That's why you don't meet many. Yet they always win elections and are always in power. Now that doesn't mean that the UK isn't incredibly right-wing. It might be. But the voting data doesn't prove this. More people don't vote than vote Conservative. More people don't vote than vote Labour. Also, because of the two-party system, whatever the Tory government happens to be at the time, its voter base is full of people who aren't really behind this government. It's always a compromise. It's always full of people who are just voting Tory simply to keep Labour out. So the two-party system always means massive vote gravitation towards Labour and Tory, but it also means that their base is incredibly flaky. But you notice, whatever the weather, the Labour Party establishment, including the supposed left-wing liberal Guardian media, the analysis is always, Labour needs to move further to the right. Of course, they say further to the centre, but if you're a left-wing party, that invariably means further to the right. But the argument is, well, that's what Blair did. Well, Blair came to power for a number of complicated reasons. And although Blair's victory in 1997 was massive, was stonking, his other victories were not so impressive. And if you look at the numbers, were much more to do with the Tories losing the election than Labour winning. So just picking a random constituency, could be anywhere in the UK. Let's just say Hartlepool, which just so happens to have a by-election coming up. The first proper post-Brexit election of an MP. Wow, so lucky we chose that one. Anyway, so let's look at Hartlepool. North East seat, Labour through and through, never voted for a Tory MP since it was created. Let's have a look at how different Labour campaigns have fared up there. So back before New Labour, before Blair, Hartlepool was, as it always has been, a pretty safe Labour seat. The sort of place you could put some kind of disgusting, shape-shifting lizard-type character like Peter Mandelson in and still get over 50% of the vote, as we see here in 1992. Zipping on to 1997, Blair's historic landslide victory. What's happening in Hartlepool? Not very much. Almost the exact same amount of people voted for Labour. But the Labour vote share is up from 51% to 60%. How has that happened? Well, the Conservative vote is down from 18,000 to 9,000. So the Conservative vote has halved. Where have those voters gone? Pretty much nowhere. They just haven't voted. So despite Blair's apparently incredible campaign, in Labour stronghold like Hartlepool, clearly they weren't that impressed by Blairism. But as always, they voted Labour and Labour won the seat. You can always take places like Hartlepool for granted. That's why you don't really have to put in a decent MP. You can just put in someone like Peter Mandelson. You don't have to really worry about the concerns of the people of Hartlepool because they'll always vote Labour, won't they? So let's see what happens now. We finally got a Labour government. The people of Hartlepool, finally, we're being represented down in Westminster. It's going to be great times, isn't it, in Hartlepool for the next decade. 2001, Labour vote is down. Oh no, what's happened? People not very happy with Blair, it seems. Turnout is low even by Hartlepool standards, and across the country, the 2001 election was an historically low. All of the excitement about bringing in a Labour government, about changing up in 1997, that's all gone by 2001. Labour, of course, still win Hartlepool, because look at the Conservative vote, that's even further down. And across the country, very few people voted for Labour. Their vote was down all over the place, but so was the Conservatives. So of course, Labour won the election, but you can equally argue, really the Tories just lost the election. People didn't come out. In 1992, 18,000 people voted for the Conservatives. In 2001, that's down to 7,000. Now, if the Conservatives could get their vote back out in places like Hartlepool, that would be 18,000 to 22. That's getting close for Peter Mandelson. Let's have a look in 2004. Peter Mandelson stepped down, high-profile figure gone. There's a by-election. Labour get 12,000 votes. The Lib Dems have come in here. This is the time when the Lib Dems, before they go into coalition with the Tories, they're positioning themselves as outside of the two main parties, an alternative to the lies and spin and lack of real political change that the Tories and Labour offer. And they do very well from that. The Conservatives now really down there, only 3,000 votes. It's a Labour win, for sure, but 12,000 votes from 22,000, it's got to be worrying, right? Now we cut to the actual election in 2005. Labour's back up, but it's now only 18,000, barely beating the Tories of 1992 and losing to the Tories of, say, 1983, when the Conservatives got almost 19,000. So again, yes, Labour win, as they win the election nationally. But this is a Labour stronghold, and look at the vote turnout. It seems as if 3 terms of Blair has taken a third off the Labour vote. 2010, okay, now we've got Gordon Brown. Nobody likes Gordon Brown. Votes down even further, 16,000. Now, there's so many elections before this where the Conservatives got over 16,000. But because everybody hates the Tories, they still managed to hold on to the seat. Where have these Labour voters gone? They haven't gone to the Tories. They haven't gone to the Lib Dems, which still gets a solid 6,000 as they did before 2004. Some of them have clearly gone to UKIP or the BNP, or maybe these are Tory voters. We don't really know. We don't really know because most people aren't voting, right? Most of the Labour vote has stayed at home. Most of the Conservative vote has stayed at home. Both the Conservatives and Labour have enough voters in Hartlepool to win the seat. If they could just convince their supporters to come out and actually vote for them. They don't need to win votes from each other. Then we come to 2015. This is after the Lib Dems went into coalition with the Tories. Totally destroys the Lib Dem vote. Some of them may have come back and propped up Labour. Voting turnout is slightly up, but that's mostly UKIP voters. Who are these people? They may be Conservative voters that have dropped off. They may be Labour voters that have dropped off. The problem is that the vote share is so low for both Labour and the Conservatives that there are so many voters who are not turning out in most elections that we don't really know who these people are when they do turn up. And now we come to 2017. So a lot has changed in these 2 years. Jeremy Corbyn has become leader, and we've had the Brexit referendum. The Brexit referendum saw an historically high turnout, higher than most general elections. And as a result of that, the 2 elections since then, 2017 and 2019, have both also seen dramatic rises in the turnout. Up there in Hartlepool, still turnout is low. It's higher than it has been for the last few elections, but what is most notable is Labour have suddenly rocketed straight back up, from 35% of the vote up to 52%, 21,000. There's more votes in Hartlepool for Labour than they've had since 2001. So unlike Blair himself, or Gordon Brown, or Ed Miliband, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party has turned around both the declining vote share and the decline in votes in general for Labour in Hartlepool. And this happened across the north. However, voting is up across the country for both Labour and the Tories. So in Labour seats like Hartlepool, there was a massive boost to Labour, but there was also a huge rise for the Tories. 16% for Labour, 13% for the Tories. But we'll talk more about 2017 a little bit later. Let's go on to 2019. And here enters the Brexit Party. So in 2015, UKIP are second in Hartlepool with 11,000. The UKIP vote collapses in 2017 because both parties, Labour and the Conservatives, policy is to get Brexit done. The referendum is over. Now, it may be that these UKIP voters have all gone to the Conservative Party. Voters have come back to Labour who just didn't vote. We don't really know. What we do know in 2019, though, is that Labour's vote goes from 21,000 down to 15,000. Almost as low as 2015. So 14% drop. The Tories are also down, but not by half as much. And we have a new party, the Brexit Party, taking 10,000 votes. Surely a lot of those came from Labour. Turnout is about the same. The Lib Dems are also up slightly, getting in those Remainers, chipping away a little bit more at Labour. But the argument made here is that if the Brexit Party hadn't run in Hartlepool in 2019, all of those votes would have went to the Conservatives. Now, there's no evidence for that. A lot of people stayed home, as always. A lot more people may have stayed home if the Brexit Party hadn't been there. Because in places like Hartlepool, the rule for a long time is you must vote Labour. Since Blair, basically, that has changed, and it's not so much that you must vote Labour, but that you definitely don't vote Tory. And what the Brexit Party did was it gave voters in places like Hartlepool a chance to vote for Brexit, for leave, against Labour's Remain abetting position, without having to do the disgusting thing of voting for the Conservatives. So it split Labour's vote. The Brexit Party initially were going to run candidates in every constituency, but then dropped that policy to just run in Labour seats where they thought the Conservatives could win, to split the Labour Leave vote and not to split the Conservative Leave vote. So as a tactic, it worked out incredibly well. In places like Hartlepool, Labour still won. In other parts of the north, that wasn't the case. The number of votes for Labour dropped and their vote share dropped. Now, whether this was Labour moving over to the Brexit Party or it was simply that Labour voters stayed home and Conservatives came back out and voters who were perhaps not fans of the Conservatives or Labour came out for the Brexit Party, it was almost certainly a mixture of all of these things. But the point is that the 2017 manifesto, the 2017 leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who was seen as an incredibly radical figure, an incredibly left-wing figure, actually reversed a long-term vote decline in places like Hartlepool. What seems to have been conveniently forgotten about 2017 was that it saw Labour's biggest vote swing since 1945. But unlike in 1945, when there hadn't been an election for 10 years, Corbyn's vote swing was achieved in 2 years. Under almost any other circumstances, the 2017 result would have guaranteed a win for Labour. Not only a win, but a stonking majority. And yet, in 2017, Corbyn didn't win. Why was that? Well, because although Labour's vote share was up, which generally would mean that the Conservative vote share was down, that wasn't the case. The Conservative vote share was also up. More people were voting for both parties. And Theresa May got one of the biggest election victories in decades. Corbyn in 2017 got more votes than David Cameron in 2015. He would have won that election. Than Cameron did in 2010. He would have won that election. Than Blair did in 2005. Corbyn would have beaten Blair. He would have also beaten Blair in 2001. He would have almost beaten Blair in 1997, but yet he still loses because Theresa May got almost 14 million votes. Theresa May would have beaten Tony Blair in 97. Theresa May would have won any election in the last 3 decades. Why did Theresa May get so many votes? Possibly because she ran an incredibly good campaign and she was an incredibly popular leader, an incredibly great politician. That might be the reason. But I believe it has more to do with Brexit and the fact that a year earlier, millions of people who had never voted before or hadn't voted for years came out in support of the UK leaving Europe. And Theresa May came in as the leader willing to do this. Now, Labour also took a Brexit position, but much of the party were clearly not behind that. And this was widely known to the public and a big talking point during the election. Come 2019, Corbyn still gets an incredible amount of votes. But in 2019, that wasn't enough, and it was a terrible defeat for Labour. But what's interesting is the narrative before 2017 was that Labour can never go left-wing, they can never reach out to their core voters and move beyond that. They always have to just triangulate between holding on to as much of that old support as they can while not really representing them at all, and trying to get a few Tory voters here and there. Well, in 2017, Corbyn not only shored up the Northern Wall seats, he also won massive majorities in Labour's inner city seats in the south, as well as winning over new seats undreamed of by Labour. In 2019, much of this continued, although in areas of the country that voted for Brexit, Labour lost. And yet the narrative has returned to, well, Labour needs to go to the right to win elections. So in the past, when Labour needed to win traditionally Conservative seats, they had to move to the right to try and steal a few votes from the Conservatives, instead of reaching out to the millions of people that didn't vote. Now that they have to win back old Labour seats, they have to move to the right again, apparently, to win over Conservative voters, rather than again looking at all of the people that don't vote. Which takes us seamlessly into the 2021 Hartlepool by-election, where the Labour top bods are now going to be running the very type of candidate who comes out of Blair legacy thinking, the very sort of candidate that has been losing Labour votes in places like Hartlepool for decades.
I'm Dr. Paul Williams, Labour's candidate to be MP here in Hartlepool.
Here's Paul Williams on Twitter talking about how honoured he is to be made the Labour candidate without any democratic process.
I've just heard that I've been selected as the Labour candidate for Hartlepool, and it's an honour to have been selected for Hartlepool. It's a brilliant town.
I'm so honoured that my friends in Westminster have parachuted me in without the local CLP having any say in it, really.
Working during this crisis, I've seen the NHS at its best.
No, you've seen the NHS at its worst, surely.
And fighting for services at our local hospital would be my top priority as your MP. Now, I know the toll that this crisis has taken on people, and I know what we need to do to recover. I want to see good jobs in the town.
Yes, I want to see good hospitals and good jobs. That's politics, baby.
More police on the streets to keep people safe.
More police on the streets, of course, yeah, but just to keep people safe, obviously. I don't want more police on the streets to hurt anyone.
The local hospital with services that people need.
You've already mentioned that. Is that everything? You can't think of anything else?
I'm Dr. Paul Williams, Labour's candidate to be MP here in Hartlepool. It's a bit windy, but the sun is shining and it's been fantastic to be out listening to people today on the doorsteps.
Oh yeah, what did you discuss? Come on, give us a little bit of detail. It's just like Starmer. I've been having really robust conversations. We've had really gritty discussions. You're not saying anything. He's like an 8-year-old on the first day of term, writing about what they got up to over the summer. I was the Labour Party candidate for Hartlepool. I felt good. I had a conversation. It was windy. Great work, Paul Williams. Thanks for sharing. Now, I think Labour have got every chance of winning this. With the Brexit debate thoroughly over now, at least in electoral terms, I imagine that many voters just won't turn out. Those that were traditionally Labour voters but voted Brexit will go back to Labour. But who knows, maybe the Conservatives will win. Maybe voters won't go back to Labour. Maybe Labour voters will just stay home. Labour has every chance of keeping Hartlepool, and they may well win back many seats in the Red Wall. But that will be in spite of Keir Starmer, not because of him. I don't think for a minute that Starmer will get more votes in any northeastern seat than Corbyn did in 2017. And what impact will Starmer's new leadership have on Corbyn gains in the south? Take Canterbury, for example. A very different seat to Hartlepool. Tory through and through, Remainer, Southern. Not the sort of place you'd expect a Corbyn Labour Party to do very well. Let's have a look at the results. 1997, Blair's huge landslide victory. What happened in Canterbury? Well, Conservatives won, as per usual. Not much changes under the Blair years. Or Gordon Brown, or Ed Miliband. But then, 2017, the Conservative vote is up by 3,000 votes, but the Labour vote goes from 13,000 to 25,000. That's up by 20%. And by the narrowest of margins, Labour win the seat. So although the Conservatives' vote is as high as it's been for decades, 25,000, higher than it was since 1992, the Conservatives still lose, because Labour's vote share is rocketed up. Where did Labour's votes come from? Clearly not the Conservative Party, nor the Lib Dems, nor the Greens. They may well have taken some votes from UKIP, but UKIP only had 7,000 votes to go around, and surely some of them went to the Conservatives, while Labour has found 12,000 votes from absolutely nowhere. Well, I say nowhere, but obviously it's come from the 35% of people who don't vote. In 2015, turnout was 64%. In 2017, it was 72%. In 2019, it was 75%. With again both the Conservative and Labour votes being up, but this time, Labour has got a 3% rise on its 20% from last time and is now on 29,000. While the Conservatives, again with its highest number of votes since 1992, was unable to win back the seat and is now 2,000 votes behind Labour. Will Starmer be able to maintain this high number of votes in places like Canterbury, when Miliband didn't, Brown didn't, Blair didn't? There are so many seats across the south that Labour had no chance of winning before Corbyn became leader, some of which are now Labour, others are marginals. Meanwhile in the north, lots of old Labour seats that Labour were steadily losing vote share in finally went to the Tories in 2019. Places like Ashfield, Sedgefield and Workington, which all would have been lost in 2017 if it hadn't been for the Corbyn boost. You can see a decline in both turnout and Labour votes across the Red Wall from the moment Tony Blair became Prime Minister, up until the 2017 election. You can also see a rise in Conservative votes, which if you add to the UKIP vote, shows that the loss of the Red Wall had nothing to do with Corbyn and everything to do with the direction Labour took after Blair's victory. In the post-referendum election of 2017, with the collapse of the UKIP vote, You can see across these seats a turnout for the Conservatives that would have beaten Miliband in 2015 and Brown in 2010. And yet this is never mentioned when you hear analysis of the Red Wall. The other problem with attempting to nab floating voters rather than reach out to the millions of ex-Labour voters or millions of people who have never voted is that you in effect destroy political debate in the country. To stand up to the government and present an alternative vision, to fight for the people who are not being represented, this should be the job of opposition. But of course Starmer can't do this because he is trying to win over the very voters who recently elected Boris Johnson. Why do we just accept that if you're a warmongering, flag-waving Conservative with a small c, you get a choice of 2 potential Prime Ministers, while everyone else gets none? Right now, both parties are not only pro-Brexit, but pro this exact Brexit, this disastrous one happening right now. Both are pro the royal family, both love nuclear weapons, both are deeply confused about corporation tax, both are against nationalising, well, anything, both have no coronavirus plan beyond vaccines, both love spy cops, both find everything to do with Black Lives Matter, well, just annoying really. Both find grassroots movements in general quite annoying. Both find democracy pretty much an occupational hazard. Until just a few weeks ago, both were happy to let this anti-protest bill through. Whatever happens, Starmer has made this incredibly difficult for himself, when it should be really a very easy win for Labour. On top of this, there are a lot of new kids on the block.
The north of England, 15 million people, 14,000 square miles, but often feeling overshadowed by London and the southeast. Philip Proudfoot, an anthropology lecturer originally from Durham, wants to change that radically.
COVID-19 has revealed the north-south divide is not getting better, it's getting worse. There's been multiple attempts from mainstream political parties to address that divide. All of them have failed. We are in an unequal economic relationship with London. We want an independent north of England because we believe that in the north we can run our own affairs better than they can be run from Westminster over there.
One of the big political sensations of the moment is true. That's just a fact. Philip Proudfoot from Northern Independence Party, which has become a real force in British politics.
The Northern Independence Party was formed in October 2020 and already has a candidate, an ex-Labour MP, for the Hartlepool by-election.
We began as a Twitter account that responded to that moment when Andy Burnham was informed that Manchester was going to get substantially less funding than the rest of the UK.
Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region and Lancashire are being set up as the canaries in the coal mine for an experimental regional lockdown strategy as an attempt to prevent the expense of what is truly needed.
And that bred an initial outpouring of anger. So we were at the right place at the right time, and we just made a Twitter account that was the Northern Independence Party. And then I put up a Google sign-up form, and then loads of people joined that. And then we started a WhatsApp group. And then that WhatsApp group turned into other different online organizing spaces, and it slowly developed into the beginnings of a political party.
So places like Hartlepool, as with just about the entire northeast, as with Liverpool, Manchester, most of the north, never vote for a Tory government, and yet they're nearly always ruled by one. Just as Scotland never elect a Tory government. And so wouldn't it be better, wouldn't it be more democratic, if the north of England broke away and formed its own country where they got the representation that they actually voted for?
Because you know what the policy is at the moment, it's managed decline, right? And managed decline is injustice. You made a point earlier to all of those, to our towns losing all of our young people. That's a specific policy decision that's been taken by Westminster to allow these towns to fail, potentially become commuter belts to larger cities in the north, or maybe just people all move to the south, That's a common experience, and that binds the north together. That antagonism is what binds us.
And you can see how, even if Northern independence is never achieved, even if the Northern Independence Party never have an MP in Parliament, there's enough support for the fundamental idea, and probably enough people would vote for them in various constituencies, that it would split Labour's vote in crucial seats. This is exactly the threat that UKIP posed to the Tory parties before the referendum.
Victory under the first past the post system is not about winning seats, it's about shaping an agenda. We support changing the electoral system, But if that doesn't happen, we will stand in marginal seats to force our agenda, to make the North become a serious policy point. And that's, another part of what victory looks like for us, because it's not actually about winning seats. I think we'll win. I want us to win. I feel confident about it. Like our Hartlepool team are all hearing good things from everyone they talk to. Labour is panicking. They know that we're going to hit that 18 to 30 vote, that we're going to start getting some of those older voters. I don't know, there's a chance. But even if it doesn't happen, we're shaping the agenda, and that's what victory looks like. The greatest political victory, great in the sort of neutral sense, over the last 20, 30 years in this country is UKIP. We're not in the EU, and they basically didn't win any seats except for by-elections or after defections, but they basically won no political power, yet they've shaped this country. So that's what victory looks like for us.
But what made UKIP and eventually the Brexit Party so effective was that it was also appealing to Labour voters as well in Leave constituencies. In many ways, UKIP, much like the rhetoric used by Trump in the 2016 American election, is a new form of triangulation that does speak to a truth about the exploitation and the disenfranchisement and the general neglect towards towns up and down the country, and of course the lack of representation. Now UKIP focused this on the EU when of course the main problem is Westminster itself, but the problem is real, and neither Labour under Starmer or the Tories have any answers to this. Step in the Northern Independence Party. Now this taps into both the regional pride of places in the north, the understanding that nearly all investment is made by the south, in the south, that Labour generally takes their votes for granted, but instead of funneling that into a right-wing critique, they're using that power, that energy, that understanding, that localism, that better representation at a local level could be used to empower communities and fundamentally change the type of economy and political ecology that the north operates in. Or at least scare Labour into having some half-decent policies. It's a shame that in a two-party system, the only way you can really get any purchase, galvanise enough interest in what you're doing, is by forming an independence movement. But quite rightly, there's so little trust in Westminster to ever actually give the powers away themselves, for example with the Northern Assembly, that there is a feeling that in order for things to actually change, in any part of the country, in any meaningful way, you have to actually break away from the political system. Although the majority of England's most deprived areas are in the north, according to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government report in 2019, the most deprived area overall was situated way down in Essex. The southwest is also incredibly deprived. In a lecture in mid-2019, Danny Dorling showed this slide.
The map, by the way, is Freddie Heineken's map of the splitting up of Europe. Freddie Heineken, of the beer, in 1992 hired two historians to predict what would happen to this continent in future. I'm not showing you Yugoslavia. They got it spot on. It's interesting to look at Britain. I think the kind of clever thing in this map is to create a region that's called Northumbria, but give its capital York. Anyway, it's really, really hard to think about how England might split. You probably can't even imagine the idea. You can certainly imagine Scotland going. I think it would be great if Scotland went with a 66% majority. We can now understand the importance of getting a 66% majority. If you are going to try and create your own country, you really do at least want 2/3 of you to actually be in on the project.
However, another incredibly deprived part of the UK is the constituency of Islington North in London, which is Jeremy Corbyn's constituency. Maybe Corbyn, as an independent now, should campaign for Islington North to become its own country, and then he can finally be Prime Minister. Localising political control, perhaps more importantly giving local authorities financial autonomy from central government, is certainly one way in which a new party can find footing in this crazy first-past-the-post system. But dividing the country up into smaller and smaller states, in many ways, is just a distraction from dealing with the real issues. But if a left-wing party, or a coalition of local parties, the NIP, a left-wing Cornish separatist group, etc., banded together to form a united front that was serious about devolving power from Westminster, without the need for setting up new states, could that rally enough support to topple the two main parties, or at the very least, force Labour to change tact.
Maybe in the future what we're going to see, and what some people within NIP advocate for, is an emerging coalition of parties where, for instance, we will stand in all of the seats in the north and other parties will stand in seats in the south. But breaking down regional inequality is no bad thing. And breaking down the Westminster system is no bad thing. It's a strategic proposition. And we can exercise solidarity from an independent North, potentially in a stronger position than we could within the Labour Party right now. And I think you'd agree that's hard to argue against.
You shouldn't have to vote Labour to be a Labour member. As Starmer has said, he believes Alistair Campbell should be let back in after voting for the Lib Dems. And I think Starmer is quite right. I think we could all learn a lot from Alistair Campbell's example.
Oh, the time will come up when the winds will stop and the breeze will cease to be breathing, like the stillness in the wind, for the hurricane begins. The eye of the ship comes in. Oh, the seas will split and the ship will hit, and the sands and the shoreline will be shaken. Then the tide will sound and the wind will pound, and the morning will be broken.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.